This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hey guys, welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe. Today I am watching and listening to myself introducing the show because today is a Breaking Leaders episode, and guess what? My leader of today is the founder of the Provoke family and Breaking Banks, the one and only Brad King. Brad,
Hey.
I want to say, I usually say welcome back to the show, but you probably have
it's welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe, I guess, but as you say, we are coming up on our 9th anniversary just next month in May, rather.
Exactly, and two of them together.
So that's 9 years that I've been doing this podcast. But we're gonna have our 10th anniversary. We have to think about what we do for the 10th anniversary. But who would have thought that this little thing, the podcast that I started back in May of 2013, around the time of Breaking Bad, that's why we called it Breaking Banks, right? Who would have thought that it's become this huge thing, with millions of listeners every year, and with all these different spin-offs and partnerships. Now we're producing the Finovate podcast, and for Emerge Everywhere, and Next Gen Banker, and a bunch of other things as well. And Robert Turchak and I are launching a new podcast this year. As well. I know we've also launched Breaking Payments, but we're also launching the Futurists podcast over the next few months. So,
was that post that I read on Instagram and Facebook by saying, hey, out of this conversation, we should launch something? What was like an over-the-counter conversation?
Well, Robert and I have known each other for a while, but, I've been working on something since 2020 around the sort of futurist branding, sort of getting the world's top future forecasters and thinkers together in sort of one forum to have a sort of a conversation. And so we, Robert is, his background is in media. He was one of the key guys behind the creation of MTV. He ran Viacom for a number of years, but he's really now, specializing in sort of metaverse and Web 3.0 and things like that. We've known each other for a few years. We run in the same circle, a lot of futurist friends, and we sort of thought, how do we put our network together to sort of create some really interesting content? So that's where it led to. And it's sort of like our effort to get all of the world's top thinkers on the future together in one place. Because a lot of people call themselves futurists, but we're really looking for people who have a demonstrated track record in not predicting the future, because I don't think that's really possible, but forecasting trends, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, on this, like the two building up the comments, once that indeed you mentioned Breaking Payments, we recorded the kickoff yesterday. We have like our first 4 amazing partners who are like P-Pro, Pioneer, Tunes, and Plaid. And we will record the 12 episodes already, plus some live content from the Money 2020s and
Awesome.
the big shows of the planet. So and like in the continuation to what you were saying about Breaking Banks being 9 years old, I read an article super interesting where it says that in the past 3 years, none of the podcasts that were born, and most of them during the pandemic, managed to get in the top 10 or 20, I can't remember exactly how many positions, of the globally listened podcasts. And the ones that had a better chance to sort of not only survive but really scale were the ones created longer ago, which is why I felt profoundly fortunate, to have the chance to build Breaking Bank Zero, but in the Provoke family, because apparently sort of your footprint on the podcast market counts. I mean, it is actually much better to not be a newbie, and often because of a pandemic or this digital leapfrog in the way that you put content online. But I think that you were
so much
to
is
say that you were. You
so much
were
is
looking.
happening.
You're a forward looking. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, now so much is happening in terms of content. You've got short form content. You've got, the metaverse we're talking about. We're talking about, you've got TikTok, which is 3-minute clips. And so, if you look at what's happened just the last decade, there's sort of been this explosion of content. But think about our listening habits. Podcast listenership declined significantly during the pandemic because people weren't driving to work. They weren't commuting, right? And so there was already evidence as a result of sort of this listening behavior that people had shifted away from listening to the radio and listening to sort of the typical things that you'd listen to that to now podcast listening. And so it really had podcasts and YouTube and these new different forms of content, and in terms of the way it's consumed, it's been an explosion of choice for people. But I think this is where your audience and who you can bring together. And this is one of the things, for both you and I, Matteo, is that, we've obviously been involved in the fintech world since, 2010 at a minimum, even before in many respects. And so that network that we have, bringing content to that network, I think is something that is logical for us. But, we at the same time, I think we've blazed a trail, and with Breaking Banks in particular. And I know a lot of other podcasts have come on stream. There's new podcasts that started over the last couple of years, but we are sort of the OGs of the fintech podcasting world. Obviously, we're the number one fintech podcast over the last decade, which I'm very proud of. But there's a real question: where do we go next? What do we do to keep this fresh? What can we do? So, this year we're going to be working on a bunch of special episodes, sort of like feature episodes for Breaking Banks. And that will include things like, man on the street interviews and a much higher production value. So one that we're working on right now is around the central bank digital currency launch in China. And things like that. So there are opportunities for us to sort of extend the platform further. But I think I'm very proud of our listenership and the base of support that we've built up, and I just want to continue to deliver every week for the last 9 years. I've been delivering a podcast, and so. Multiple podcasts now. So that's pretty cool. And as you said, Provoke, now we're getting to the point where we'll have close to a dozen podcasts, active this year for Provoke. So, it's obviously become something bigger than I anticipated when we started Breaking Banks back in 2013.
Absolutely. And I also believe that there is another theme that we are not touching, and I'm talking about this because I'm right now in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, and I'm here for an insurance event in the reinsurance space, which penetration, by the way, is less than 2%. Is amazing, the potential that InsurTech has in Africa and the digitalization of insurance services. I believe that there is, we have almost the duty to start talking about insurance specifically on a vertical on the Provoke family. And I'm thinking of a breaking insurance, Brett. What do you think?
I'm not an insurance guy in terms of expertise. I'd have to leave that with you. But yeah, obviously, ultimately it comes down to whether we can support the content on an ongoing basis. That's the most critical thing. Can we create interesting content every week or every 2 weeks? Have we decide to do it? And have we got enough of a network in that respect? So, I think there's people we could bring in. There's InsurTech guys like Steve Monahan, Nigel Walsh, and others that I think we've got in our network that could be quite interesting to tap for this. But it's not my space. So I'll defer to you, Matteo, on that respect. But there's obviously I'd like to see us do something with crypto. Maybe Arjit and I can do something in the crypto space and DeFi space, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the second topic I would mention, especially because there is a lot of misinformation on this, and a lot of new buzzwords, and I don't know if you follow, but I provocatively post this tweet about I think it was Justin Bieber buying in 1.3 million NFTs,
yeah.
and I said,
someone just bought a virtual real estate place next to Snoop Dogg for $750,000 as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And our friend Neil Cross, from the other side of the planet, basically, when I said, listen, what am I missing? Neil answered one line, very pragmatic. Let's say, think ICOs. And ICOs as another trend that completely disappeared, that make a few like a multimillionaire, a lot of losers, or a lot of latecomers that lost everything. And I know whether NFTs or not is going to have the same fate. But personally, I do not follow bubbles. I only put my money in things that I understand, and I don't fully grasp that one, which is the reason why we should maybe talk more about it.
No, absolutely. I think the conversation is powerful in respect to we if you look at one of the things I'm proudest of for Breaking Banks in particular is we've sort of chronicled the fintech industry in terms of its growth. And so if you look historically at the episodes we produced, we have put in place a record historically of the surge and the boom in fintech. From we interviewed the guys from the Bitcoin Foundation in the early days. This is when Bitcoin was still under, this was when it was hundreds of dollars of in terms of per Bitcoin, rather than tens of thousands that we've seen over the last few years. We interviewed N26, Monzo, Starling, all these guys. We had Josh and Shamir from Simple on, back in the day, before they were acquired even, So it's like we've really sort of documented the history of the space. And I think that, there's a great record there of, this sort of the explosion of ideas around fintech and the role it's played in modernizing the way we think about financial services and creating financial inclusion, and the digitization thing. We were talking about digitization and digital transformation, obviously well before the pandemic. And of course, during the pandemic, everyone's gone digital, and, there's been this explosion, and everyone was like, wow, it's accelerated, digital adoption by years, and it's like, well, but we were talking about this as sort of inevitable, 9 years ago. and now it's just sort of evidenced of that. But I feel very happy that we've sort of been able to chronicle all of those changes that have been taking place. And last year was a record for investment in fintech globally. Who knows what's going to happen this year? It's already started off some big deals. We saw the Rails Bank deal this week and others. So there's there continues to be a role for voices like Breaking Banks in the community to help people understand the broader impact of fintech and how it's changing the world.
By the way, Brad, now you gave me an idea. I think that you should remember, as we almost could do a museum, in a digital museum, putting together, for example, but putting together.
We could do a timeline. We could do like a timeline, a fintech timeline, and we could have different episodes as the milestones.
Exactly.
I get it. Yeah.
Exactly, and maybe and having a vertical on all the digital banks we interviewed, and follow them. That could be interesting. Okay, like a bit, we don't have a lot of time left. We haven't talked properly since you have been on a book tour. How is the book tour coming up?
The book's done really well. So the book you're talking about, of course, is what we call The Rise of Techno-Socialism. I've got my copy here. This is a book I wrote with a policy guy out of Hong Kong, Dr. Richard Petty, and a friend of mine for the last 20 years. But this is sort of focused on essentially how artificial intelligence and climate change and the pandemic and inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor, how all of these things are going to reshape society over the coming decades. So it's definitely full futurist, not a banking book per se. There is obviously discussion about cryptocurrencies and CBDCs and the economies of the future in the book. But
there are like 3 or 4 big scenarios, right?
Yeah. So there's 4 scenarios, and I'll show you a chart while we're talking. So when we looked at the future of the world and we started modeling this, particularly in respect to sort of financial inclusion, which we had been talking about, we sort of tried to figure out a way to express that in respect to the different models. And so we came up with this chart, which was basically chaotic futures versus planned futures and inclusive strategies versus exclusionary. So the problem with exclusionary models, and capitalism is increasingly exclusionary. That means it creates it's stratifying society
only for
between
the
rich
few.
and poor.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously there's a lot of people talking about reform of capitalism right now to be more inclusive. But if we double down on the capitalist system without reform, then you have, essentially this gap between the rich and the poor accentuated. So then you have orderly transitions to the future versus chaotic transitions to the future. So we map those into 4 scenarios. And on the chaotic side, you have the rejection of technology. We called the Ladistan, the rejection of science and technology, the Ladistan scenario. Then you have the failed states, where we just waited too long to react to things like climate change or the introduction of artificial intelligence and what it's going to do to employment. And then on the planned side, you have neo-feudalism, which is sort of extends the inequality issue, and it sort of bakes that in, versus what we call techno-socialism, which we argue in the book is the optimal form of humanity, where we use technology to do good for the most people possible. And so we demonstrate, in the book, for example, how using technology, you could dramatically reduce the cost of governance. You could dramatically reduce the cost of providing the basic needs to society. For example, healthcare. We show in the United States you could reduce healthcare costs in the US by 70%, 70, right? Through the use of multiple technologies over the next 20, 30 years. And so, if you call healthcare socialism, if you live in the United States, you don't call it that anywhere else in the world. But if you live in the United States, people say, universal healthcare is a socialist model. But here's the point. If we could do that at a fraction of the cost of the existing system, isn't that capitalism working as it should, right? But efficient government is something I think that everyone can sort of agree on. So automation of that is a big part of what we talk about in techno-socialism, the fact that you can reduce the cost of government and therefore provide basic services like housing, shelter, education, healthcare, access to food, etc., as part of the basic construct of the economy. And that's really one of the key arguments of the book, is that if an economy can't provide for the basic needs of its citizens, can you say it's successful? You could have massive GDP growth, you could have great trade balances and all of that, but if you can't feed your population, then is the economy successful? And so this is really part of the conversation we're trying to have. It's more a philosophical conversation than it is. It's certainly not political in that sense, but it's a departure from fintech. I'll give you that.
And it is actually a book of hope, right? So because
I'm an optimist. You know that about me, and Richard as well.
Yeah.
So we, it's techno-optimistic. It's like, this is what technology could do for humanity if we let it, right? Including, we look at solving the problems of climate change and those other issues.
On this positive note, Brett, thank you for this informal chat. I think we should do it more often, because even if it is just a conversation, it allows us to share and to leapfrog in what else is coming up on Breaking Banks. Thanks for sharing a few thoughts about your last book. And techno-socialism is here for stay, for sure. I mean, was just launched, but I see you presenting everywhere, and more friends putting their pictures. So I'm pretty sure that the sales are going to keep growing, and it's a wish as well for you.
I'm going to keep writing. If people keep buying my books and reading them, I'll keep writing.
Exactly. Brett, thanks a lot, and let's wish for both of us another great year of Breaking Banks.
All right, Brady. Yep, thanks again, and here's to year 10.
And it's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with Fintech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.